He called my career a cute hobby at dinner. Everyone laughed. He did not know I trace money for a living. Weeks later, I handed his wife a folder that ended everything. But that moment did not start at the wedding. It started at that dinner table, when I pulled out my phone under the table and checked one thing he said. One small thing. And his face changed. My name is Greer. I am a forensic financial analyst. I work freelance, which in my family's language means I do not have a real job. I trace money for a living. I find where it goes when someone does not want it found. I review accounts, flag irregularities, and build cases that end up in courtrooms. I am good at it. But because I work from a laptop in my apartment and do not wear a blazer to an office, my family has never once taken it seriously. My sister Tatum is 3 years older, and the kind of woman rooms adjust to. My father Ward built his identity around the idea that his family looked successful, and Tatum was his proof. My mother Diane kept the surface clean, every topic redirected, every uncomfortable truth smoothed over, every awkward question answered with a smile and a subject change. I was not the daughter they presented. I was the daughter they explained. She is finding her path. She does things her own way. Every sentence a polite way of saying, we have stopped trying to understand her. The dinner happened on a Sunday evening. Tatum had been dating a man named Sterling for a few months, and this was his grand introduction, the family debut. Ward had been talking about him for weeks. Diane had planned the menu around his dietary preferences. The table was set for 5, and every detail was calibrated to impress. Sterling walked in like he had been there before, the kind of man who takes up space not by size but by certainty. He shook Ward's hand, complimented Diane's cooking before tasting it, pulled Tatum's chair out. The whole room tilted toward him like flowers toward a window. I sat across the table and I watched. When you grow up invisible in your own family, you develop a skill most people never need. You learn to read rooms the way other people read books. Every gesture, every pause, every shift in tone. Dinner moved the way it always did in my family. Conversation orbited Tatum, and now Sterling. Ward asked about his work. Sterling described himself as a private wealth strategist working with high-net-worth clients on portfolio diversification and philanthropic structures. He said it the way someone recites a rehearsed answer in a job interview. Smooth, complete, no hesitation. Diane was glowing. Ward was nodding. Tatum was watching Sterling the way people watch someone they have already decided to believe. Then Sterling turned to me. He asked what I did. I said I work in financial analysis. He tilted his head and smiled. He said, "Oh, that is a cute hobby. Is it freelance?" I said yes. He said so more of a side thing. He looked at Ward and Tatum like he was sharing a joke, and they both smiled back, and I felt the table close around me like it always did. The invisible daughter confirmed invisible again by a man who had known me for 40 minutes. I did not respond. I never do. Not because I am weak. Because reacting at that table costs more than it is worth. Every time I have pushed back, the room rearranges against me. Diane sighs. Ward stiffens. Tatum changes the subject. The message is always the same. Do not make this difficult. But here is where Sterling made his mistake. He kept talking. He described a recent project involving a non-profit structure tied to international development. He mentioned a regulatory framework by name. He described a compliance process in detail, and something about it snagged in my brain the way a loose thread catches on a nail. The framework he described does not apply to the type of work he claimed to do. It is used in an entirely different sector. I know this because I spent 3 years working with an auditing firm that specialized in exactly that area. The terminology was correct, but the application was wrong. Like someone who memorized the right words but put them in the wrong sentence. I did not say anything. But my hand moved to my phone under the table. I opened a browser and typed the name of the framework he had just mentioned. The results loaded in seconds. I was right. It did not apply to his field. Not even close. Sterling noticed. He stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. He said, "Am I boring you?" The table laughed. I looked up from my phone and smiled. I said no. Just checking something. But something shifted in his face. A flicker behind the confidence, the kind of look a man gets when he realizes someone in the room is paying a different kind of attention. It lasted half a second. Then the performance resumed. But I had seen it. And he knew I had seen it. The rest of the dinner passed without incident. Sterling told more stories. Ward laughed. Diane refilled glasses. I ate quietly and left early. Before I continue, I want to know who is here with me right now. What city are you watching from and what time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where the story reaches. The next morning I sat at my desk and I could not stop thinking about that search result. I almost let it go. But then I remembered cute Hobby. The way he looked at Ward for approval. The way the whole table laughed. Something hardened inside me. Not anger, focus. I called Nico the next day. He was someone I had worked with on a fraud investigation 2 years earlier. Quiet. Thorough. The kind of person who pulls threads without breaking them. I did not tell him about Sterling by name. I just asked him to look into the public filings of a small wealth management entity I had found registered to a virtual office. No website, no staff, no history. Just a name on paper. Nico said he would check. 2 days later, he sent a file that made me sit up straight. The entity had received deposits from personal accounts over 18 months. Irregular amounts, but patterned. Staged funding rounds from individual investors. No client contracts. No service agreements. No evidence of actual portfolio management. Money went in. Very little came out. 2 depositors had filed small claims disputes that were quietly settled before reaching court. Sterling was not a wealth strategist. He was collecting money from people who trusted his vocabulary and his suits. And now, he was at my family's dinner table, being applauded for it. But I did not have enough yet. Suspicion is not proof. And my family would not listen to suspicion. They would listen to nothing from me. So I told Nico to keep going. Deeper. Wider. Every public filing. Every registered entity. Every name connected to Sterling's financial footprint. And I waited. Not because I am patient by nature. Because I learned a long time ago that the people who move too fast are the ones who get dismissed. And I was done being dismissed. Then the invitation arrived. Cream envelope. Gold lettering. Tatum and Sterling. October. Charleston. A historic venue with ivy walls and a courtyard built for exactly the kind of family that valued appearance over everything else. I marked attending, and I kept working. Nico's next file arrived days later. This one was different. He had found a pattern that went beyond one shell company. Sterling had operated under a slightly different version of his name in another state. Same playbook. Small entity. Personal deposits. No legitimate business activity. And a woman who had filed a complaint describing a man who had promised investment returns and disappeared when the questions got specific. Sterling had done this before. Different city, different name, different woman. Same script. I printed every document. I organized them in a single folder. Clean, clear, undeniable, facts arranged in order. No commentary, no accusations, just paper that spoke for itself. I put the folder in my desk drawer, and I looked at it every morning until the wedding. Not because I was nervous, because I was making sure that when the moment came I would be ready. Not angry, not vengeful, just steady. The woman who traces money for a living had found exactly where Sterling's went. The family who called it a cute hobby was about to learn what that hobby could do. The wedding was on a Saturday. I drove to Charleston with the folder on the passenger seat and my hands tight on the wheel. Not nervous. Loaded. Like a woman carrying something she had been building for months and was about to set down in exactly the right place. The venue was a restored plantation house with ivy climbing the columns and white chairs arranged in rows across a courtyard. Everything was immaculate. Flowers in glass jars. A string quartet warming up under a canopy, the kind of setting designed to photograph well and ask no questions. I signed the guest book. I found my seat in the back row. I crossed my legs and I waited. Tatum walked down the aisle looking like a magazine cover. Her dress caught the light in a way that made people inhale. Ward walked beside her with his chin up and his chest out. the proudest I had ever seen him. Diane sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief she had probably ironed that morning. Sterling stood at the altar in a navy suit with his hands clasped and that same polished smile I had been studying for weeks. They said their vows. Rings exchanged. The courtyard erupted in applause. I clapped too. My hands made the sound, but the rest of me was somewhere else. Somewhere quiet and focused and counting the minutes until the reception. The cocktail hour was a blur of champagne and small talk. I moved through the crowd like a shadow. A cousin asked how work was going. I said good. An aunt said I looked thin. I said thank you. Nobody asked anything that required a real answer. My chest was tight, not from anxiety, from the weight of what I was carrying. I could feel the folder in my bag pressing against my hip like a second heartbeat. The reception began. Speeches started. Ward delivered a toast about legacy and the kind of man every father hopes his daughter will find. He looked at Sterling the entire time. He did not look at me once. Diane raised her glass with tears. Tatum squeezed Sterling's hand. 200 people who believed what they were looking at. And me. At a table near the back, knowing what none of them knew, I waited until the speeches ended and the music started. People drifted toward the dance floor. The noise level rose. Plates were being cleared. The room's attention scattered in a dozen directions. That was the window. I stood up, I smoothed my dress, I picked up my bag, and I walked toward Tatum. She was standing near the head table talking to a bridesmaid when I touched her elbow. She turned, and her face did something complicated. Surprise first, then a flicker of warmth she did not expect to feel. Then suspicion, because warmth for me was not something she was used to receiving. I leaned close. I said, I need 5 minutes. Just you and me. She frowned. I said, please. It is important. Something in my voice made her stop. Maybe it was the steadiness. Maybe it was the fact that I had never once in my life asked her for 5 minutes of anything. She looked at the bridesmaid. She looked at Sterling across the room. Then she nodded and followed me through a side door into a small room off the main hall. A coat room. Quiet. Private. The muffled bass of the reception thumping through the wall. She crossed her arms. She asked what this was about. Her jaw was tight and her weight was shifted to one foot the way she stood when she was preparing to be annoyed. I opened my bag. I pulled out the folder. I held it for a moment. It was heavier than paper should be. 6 months of work. 6 months of silence. 6 months of watching a man smile at my family while hiding who he actually was. I handed it to her. She opened it. The first page was a corporate filing. The second was a transaction record. The third was a dispute summary from a woman in another state describing a man who had taken her money and disappeared. The fourth page had a photograph. Sterling. Under a different name, in a different city. With a different woman. Tatum's hand started trembling. Not a lot. Just enough that the pages shook. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but her mouth was hard. She said, "What is this?" I said his name is not Sterling. Or at least it was not always Sterling. He has operated under a different name in at least one other state. He ran a shell company that collected money from people who trusted him. 2 of them filed complaints. One of them described a relationship that sounds exactly like yours. Her breathing changed. Short, shallow. The kind of breathing that happens when the body understands something the mind is still refusing to accept. She said, "You are lying." I said, "The documents are right there. I did not write them, I did not fabricate them. They are public records and verified filings. You can check every one of them yourself." She looked at the folder again. Her thumb moved across the photograph like she was trying to wipe it away. She said, "This does not make sense." I said, "I know." She looked at me, and for 1 second the mask dropped. Not the confident sister. Not the golden child. Just a woman in a wedding dress standing in a coat room, realizing that the man she had just married might not be who she thought he was. Her chin trembled. Her eyes filled. She pressed her lips together so hard they turned white. Then she said, "Why are you doing this to me?" Her voice cracked on the word me. I felt my own throat tighten. I swallowed. I said, "I am not doing this to you. I am doing this for you." Because nobody else in this family would. The door opened. Sterling walked in. He had been looking for Tatum. He saw the folder in her hands. He saw the pages spread across the small table. He saw his own photograph staring up from a document that was not supposed to exist in this room. His face changed in stages: confusion, recognition. Then something cold settling behind his eyes like a gate coming down. He looked at me. He said, "What did you do?" I did not answer him. I did not owe him an answer. I looked at Tatum instead. Sterling reached for the folder. Tatum pulled it back. That small motion said more than any confrontation could have. She pulled the evidence away from the man it was about. She chose to keep looking. Sterling's composure cracked. He said this was out of context. He said, "I did not understand the full picture." His hands were moving too fast, his sentences overlapping. The polished man who had charmed my family for months was unraveling in a coat room in front of his bride and the sister he had called a cute hobby. Ward appeared in the doorway, then Diane. The noise had drawn them. Ward looked at the papers on the table. Diane looked at Tatum's face. The room was small and getting smaller. Ward turned to me. His voice was low and sharp. He said, "What have you done? Not what happened, not what is going on. What have you done?" The accusation was aimed at me before he even understood what was on the table. That was my family. The reflex was always the same. Blame the one who speaks. Protect the surface. Diane said this is not the time or place. She said I was making a scene. She reached for Tatum's arm and Tatum stepped back. That step was small, but it shook the room. Tatum stepped away from Diane, away from the woman who had spent her whole life managing appearances, and toward the folder. I picked up my bag. I looked at Tatum one more time. Her eyes were red. Her hands were still shaking. But she was reading. She was still reading, and that was enough. I walked past Ward, past Diane, past Sterling, who was still talking to no one in particular, his voice getting louder as his audience got smaller. I walked through the reception hall where 200 people were dancing to a song they would not remember. I pushed through the front door and stepped into the evening air. The gravel crunched under my heels. The music faded behind me. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel. My fingers were trembling now, the steadiness I had carried for weeks finally letting go. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and breathed. Not crying, just breathing. The kind of breathing you do when you have been holding something for so long that putting it down feels like falling. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel righteous. I felt empty in the way a room feels after the furniture has been moved out. Clean. Bare. Ready for something new. I started the car, I pulled out of the parking lot, and I drove away from my sister's wedding without looking back. Because looking back was something I had done my entire life, and it had never once changed what I saw. I drove 3 hours home that night without stopping. The highway was dark and empty, and the white lines blurred into each other like they were trying to merge into one long sentence I could not read. My phone buzzed 11 times in the first hour. I did not look at it. I knew whose names would be on the screen, and I knew what they would say, and none of it was anything I needed to hear while my hands were still shaking on the wheel. I got home after midnight. I kicked off my heels at the door. I sat on the kitchen floor in my dress with my back against the cabinet, and I ate cold leftover rice straight from the container. Not because I was hungry, because my body needed something ordinary after a day that had been anything but. The next morning I checked my phone. 14 missed calls. Ward. Diane. Tatum. A cousin I barely spoke to. No messages from Sterling. That told me everything. A man who had spent months performing confidence could not find a single word when the curtain came down. Ward's voicemail was short. He said I had embarrassed the family. He said if I had concerns I should have come to them privately. As if privately had ever worked with them. Diane's was softer but carried the same blade. She said Tatum was devastated. She said the guests were talking. The guests. 200 strangers mattered more to my mother than the truth in a folder. Tatum did not leave a voicemail. She called 3 times and hung up each time before the recording started. I pictured her holding the phone, wanting to say something, not knowing what. That felt more honest than anything Ward or Diane had offered. I did not call any of them back. Not that day. Not the next. I went to work. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop and reviewed a case file for a client who needed an audit trail untangled. Normal work. Quiet work. The kind of work my family called a cute hobby, while the man it would have caught was standing at their dinner table being handed the family silver. A week passed. Then 2. The silence from my family was not the angry kind. It was the rearranging kind. I could feel it from a distance. They were figuring out the story. Not the truth. The story. The version they would tell at lunches and gatherings. The version that made them look like victims of my behavior rather than enablers of Sterling's. Then Nico called. He had found a third woman. Same pattern. Different state. She had written about it anonymously. She described the charm, the vocabulary, the suits, the venture that never materialized. She could have been describing my sister's relationship word for word. I saved the file. Because this was no longer about Sterling alone. This was a pattern that would repeat unless someone stopped it. 3 weeks after the wedding, Tatum called. This time she did not hang up. Her voice was different. Not the confident sister. Not the golden child presenting her latest acquisition. Stripped down. Raw. Like someone who had been crying for days and had finally run out of performance. She said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." I said, "Okay." She said, "Did you do this because you hate me?" My chest tightened. I closed my eyes. I said, "No." She was quiet. I could hear her breathing. Uneven. Catching. The sound of someone holding themselves together with nothing left to hold. She said, "Then why?" I said, "Because you are my sister. And because the man you married has done this to other women. And because if I had that folder and did not show you, I would be the same as everyone else at that table who saw what they wanted to see and looked away." She did not respond for a long time. Then she said, "I think I already knew. I think I knew something was off, and I chose not to look. Because looking meant the wedding would not happen. And if the wedding did not happen, Mom and Dad would be disappointed. And disappointing them felt worse than marrying someone I was not sure about." That sentence hit me harder than anything Sterling or Ward or Diane had ever said. Because it was not about me. It was about her. About a woman who had been the golden child her entire life, and discovered that being golden meant you could never tarnish, even if the cost of staying polished was marrying a stranger. I said, "Tatum, you can still leave." She said, "I know." Then she said, "I think I already have. He moved out yesterday." I exhaled. My shoulders dropped. I had not realized how much tension I had been carrying until it released. Not because Sterling was gone. Because Tatum had chosen herself. And that was something I had never seen her do. The next month was complicated. Tatum filed for annulment. The documents became part of the legal process. Sterling's other identities surfaced formally. The pattern that had been invisible to my family became visible to the courts. Sterling did not go quietly. He hired a lawyer who sent a letter accusing me of defamation. My own lawyer responded with 47 pages of verified public records. The letter was withdrawn within a week. Sterling's confidence worked on dinner tables. It did not work on courtrooms. Ward called me once during this period. His voice was careful. Measured. The voice of a man who was not apologizing but was trying to figure out how close to an apology he could get without actually saying the words. He said, "I should have listened." 4 words. Not "I am sorry," not "you were right," just "I should have listened." Delivered like a man reading the first line of a language he had never spoken. It was not enough, but it was the first honest sentence he had ever aimed in my direction. And I let it land without throwing it back. Diane sent a card. An actual card in the mail. It said, "I do not fully understand what happened, but I understand that you tried to protect your sister." She signed it with love. Not love followed by instructions. Not love followed by a request. Just love. It was the smallest word she had ever used, and somehow it carried the most weight. Tatum and I started talking. Not the way we used to. Not the surface conversations where she performed and I watched. Real conversations. Slow ones. The kind where someone says something honest, and then goes quiet because honesty takes more energy than either of you expected. She told me she was sorry. Not for the wedding. For the years before it. For laughing when Sterling called my work a cute hobby. For never asking what I actually did. For treating my presence at family events like a courtesy rather than a necessity. I told her the apology mattered. And then I told her what I had never said out loud. I told her that being invisible in your own family is not something you get over. It is something you learn to build around. Like a tree that grows around a fence post. The post is still there. The tree just found a way to keep going. She cried. I did not. Not because I did not feel it. Because I had already cried on a kitchen floor in a dress at midnight with cold rice in my hands. I had done my crying. this was something else. This was two sisters sitting in the wreckage of a family that had valued image over everything and deciding whether anything could be rebuilt on a different foundation. We did not hug. We did not make promises. We just said we would keep talking. And for two people who had spent a lifetime performing for the same audience, talking was the bravest thing either of us had ever done. I still work from my apartment. I still trace money. I still find where it goes when someone does not want it found. My family still does not fully understand what I do. But they have stopped calling it a hobby. And Sterling's file sits in my desk drawer, closed, finished. A reminder that the thing people dismiss is sometimes the thing that saves them. If someone in your life has ever made you feel like what you do is not real work, like your instincts are paranoia, like your quiet way of seeing the world is a weakness instead of a weapon, I want you to hear this. Trust what you notice. Trust what does not add up. And trust that the moment will come when everything you have been quietly building will speak louder than every person who ever laughed at your table. And one more thing. Have you ever caught something that everyone else missed? Something that changed everything once you said it out loud? Drop that story in the comments. Sometimes the person who sees the truth first is the loneliest one in the room, but they are also the most important. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. I will see you in the next one.